My name is Carla, and I want to tell you about a time when life was simple and love seemed to conquer all. It was an era highlighted by the laughter of family gatherings, the comforting aroma of Grandpa's famous chicken stew, and the dazzling gaze of a man named Robert, who entered my life as unexpectedly as a summer rainstorm. I met Robert at a mutual friend's birthday party. The moment I saw him across the room, I felt something click. I can't quite put it into words. It was as if the universe whispered, "Pay attention. This is important." We got to talking, and before we knew it, hours had passed. The chemistry was undeniable. "So, what do you do for fun?" Robert asked, his eyes twinkling in the dim light. "I like to read, spend time with my family, especially my grandpa and my brother Mark, and go hiking whenever I get a chance," I replied. "Wow, a family person and an adventurer. You're full of surprises," he said, clearly impressed. "I could say the same about you," I smiled, my heart doing little flips. It wasn't long before Robert and I began dating seriously, and it felt as if I had known him for a lifetime. Mark was initially skeptical but warmed up to him eventually. Grandpa, however, took an immediate liking to Robert. "You've got a good one here, Carla," Grandpa told me one afternoon when Robert had come over to help fix a leaky pipe. "I think so too, Grandpa," I grinned, thrilled that the two most important men in my life got along so well. A year later, Robert and I were married. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Grandpa walked me down the aisle since my parents had passed away when I was younger. Mark was Robert's best man. I wore a modest yet beautiful white gown that made me feel like a princess, and when Robert and I exchanged vows, it felt like time stood still. "Do you, Carla? Take Robert to be your lawful wedded husband?" "I do," I said, my voice unwavering, my eyes locked onto Robert's. "And do you, Robert, take Carla to be your lawful wedded wife?" "I do," Robert responded, his voice tinged with emotion. It felt like a fairy tale, and as we kissed, sealing our union, I believed in happily ever after. Our wedding was attended by close friends and family, but most notably by Grandpa and Mark, my two pillars. The reception was filled with laughter and dancing, and Grandpa even broke into a little jig that had everyone cheering. That night, as Robert and I left for our honeymoon, I felt incredibly lucky. Grandpa hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Take care of each other. Love is the greatest gift you can give and receive." "I will, Grandpa," I promised, tears of joy blurring my vision. It seemed as if I had everything: love, family, and the promise of a bright future. Little did I know that this blissful beginning was just that, a beginning, and that the chapters to come would test the very foundation of trust and loyalty that my life was built upon. But for that fleeting moment, in the warm embrace of matrimony and family, everything felt perfect. I wanted to hold onto that feeling forever, to freeze it in time, and protect it from the world outside. But life has a way of teaching us that nothing remains the same, and change is the only constant. Still, I had no reason to doubt the sincerity of those around me. I was surrounded by love, and I felt invincible. But as I would soon discover, even the most sturdy structures can crumble. Even the most blissful beginnings can lead to tragic endings. If Chapter 1 was all about floating in a serene, love-filled bubble, then Chapter 2 was about coming to terms with the harsh realities that life often throws our way. Financial instability was the dark cloud that loomed over our heads, a constant reminder that love alone couldn't pay the bills. Robert and I rented a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where up and coming was code for not quite there yet. It wasn't the dream home we envisioned, but it was ours, a space to call our own. The mismatched furniture, the faint smell of dampness, the constant clanging of pipes, they were like a rite of passage for us, a test of our resolve. "I got another job," Robert announced one evening, his face flushed from either the cold or the haste with which he'd arrived home. "Another one? That's your third, Rob. When will you even find time to sleep? I asked, concerned. It's just for a few months, Carla. Once we save up enough, things will get easier, he reassured me. I was working a 9-to-5 job at a local retail store, barely scraping by after paying the bills. Robert was juggling multiple part-time jobs. We were stretched thin, emotionally and financially. I don't like seeing you this stressed, Rob, I confessed one night as we sat eating a simple meal of spaghetti in store. Bought sauce. I know, love, but we'll get through this, Robert replied, offering me a wary but genuine smile. This is just the storm before the calm. It was around this time that Grandpa came to our rescue. He'd sensed our struggle, and during one of our Sunday visits to his house, he pulled me aside. You know, Carla, it's okay to ask for help when you need it, Grandpa said, his eyes studying my face. I know, Grandpa, but you've already done so much for us, I said, hesitant to accept more from him. I've saved my entire life not to hoard wealth, but to take care of my family. It would give me peace of mind to know you two are all right, he insisted. But, Grandpa, I began, but he cut me off. No buts. I want to help you financially, even if it's just for a few months. Family helps family, he concluded, his voice a mix of kindness and resolve. Robert and I accepted Grandpa's offer, and for the first time in months, we exhaled. The money didn't solve all our problems, but it eased the burden considerably. It felt like we'd been given a second wind, and we channeled that into improving our lives. We both enrolled in evening classes, Robert in a technical course to improve his skills, and I in a community college to finish the degree I'd abandoned years ago. However, for all the hope Grandpa's assistance provided, I couldn't shake off a vague sense of unease. It was as if fate was watching us closely, counting down the days until it would unleash a challenge that would dwarf all previous hardships. So yes, this chapter did offer us some calm, but it was the kind of calm that felt unsettling, like the eerie stillness that envelops everything just before a storm hits. And hit it did, with a fury and intensity that neither Robert nor I could have ever prepared for. But that is a tale for the next chapter, a chapter that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. As I lay in bed that night, cuddled next to Robert, I found myself clinging a little tighter to the peace we had managed to find. Deep inside, a small voice whispered that this was but the eye of the storm, a temporary reprieve. And though I tried to stifle that voice, to lock it away in a corner of my mind, it persisted. The storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. Life has a cruel way of reminding you that control is an illusion. Just when you think you've weathered the storm, it sends a bolt of lightning to strike at the very core of your life. For me, that bolt of lightning came in the form of a phone call. I was at work, my manager droning on about sales targets and customer satisfaction, when my phone buzzed on the desk. Glancing at the screen, I saw Mark's name flash. I knew something was wrong. Mark never called during work hours unless it was urgent. "Excuse me, I need to take this," I said, leaving the room and rushing into the hallway. "Mark? What's wrong?" I answered, my voice tinged with a mixture of anxiety and impatience. "Carla, it's Grandpa!" Time seemed to stand still. My manager, the store, my worries, all faded into a hazy blur. In that moment, only one thing mattered: getting to Grandpa. "Is he? Will he be okay?" I stammered. "We don't know yet." "You should come now," Mark replied, his voice heavy. I didn't wait to hear more. Grabbing my things, I rushed out of the office and drove straight to the hospital. The world outside was a whir of images and sounds, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Walking into the hospital room felt like walking into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Grandpa lay on the bed, hooked up to all kinds of machines. His eyes were closed, but I could see the struggle etched into the lines of his face. I could feel Mark and Robert's eyes on me, full of concern and dread, but it was Grandpa I couldn't tear my gaze from. "Hey, Grandpa." "It's Carla," I whispered, leaning over to kiss his forehead, hoping that somehow he could hear me, feel me. He opened his eyes, and for a brief second, his gaze met mine. The love and warmth I'd always found in those eyes were still there, but they were tinged with something else now, a kind of wariness, as if he were preparing for a journey he had to make alone. "Carla, the doctors say it's advanced pneumonia, and given his age, recovery is going to be tough," Mark finally spoke, breaking the oppressive silence. "I'm not leaving his side," I declared, the words heavy but necessary. Robert looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. "Are you sure, Carla? What about work? Our expenses?" "I can't think about that right now, Robert. This is my family. This is Grandpa. I have to be here," I said firmly. And so, I was. For the next several months, my life became a rotation of hospital rooms, antiseptic smells, and sleepless nights. I quit my job to care for Grandpa, a decision that only added to our financial stress. But it was not up for debate. My heart and soul were in that hospital room. Despite the grim atmosphere, I found moments of solace. Sometimes, I'd read to Grandpa, or we'd listen to his favorite songs together. On his better days, he would squeeze my hand and offer me a weak smile, as if to say, "Thank you for being here." Robert continued to work multiple jobs, and Mark was conspicuously absent. "Work's insane," he'd say on the rare occasions he visited. "But I'm glad you're here, sis." I felt abandoned by Mark, but I shoved those feelings aside. I had a purpose, caring for Grandpa. But as each day passed, it became increasingly clear that I was preparing myself for the inevitable. My fortress, my Grandpa, was crumbling before my eyes, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. It wasn't long before he passed away. Despite knowing it was coming, it felt like a sledgehammer to my chest, a visceral, gut-wrenching pain that no amount of mental preparation could alleviate. Grandpa was gone, and with him, it felt like a piece of my soul had been ripped away. The storm had arrived in full force, but I was nowhere near prepared for the destruction it would leave in its wake. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The day of Grandpa's funeral was a blur. Relatives and friends came to pay their respects, sharing stories about his kindness, wisdom, and unwavering love for his family. As much as I wanted to take comfort in their words, a knot of dread gnawed at me. Mark had been acting distant, avoiding eye contact, and Robert seemed unusually tense, but I attributed it to the circumstances. After all, we were grieving. About a week later, we gathered at Grandpa's attorney's office for the reading of the will. I didn't care about the inheritance. No sum of money could fill the void Grandpa's death had left. But I was curious about his final wishes, how he'd chosen to distribute a lifetime's worth of memories and hard work. As the attorney read through the legal jargon, my mind began to drift. That is, until I heard the words that would change everything. And finally, to my grandson Mark, I bequeathed my entire estate, including the liquid assets, amounting to $450,000. I felt like I'd been slapped across the face. My eyes darted towards Mark, who looked as if he'd just won the lottery, and then to Robert, whose expression I couldn't read. "Is that it?" I asked, bewildered. "Is there nothing left for me?" The attorney, flipping through the papers, confirmed that appears to be the final wish of the deceased. "I can't believe this. How could Grandpa do this?" I muttered, more to myself than to anyone else. "It's okay, Carla. Grandpa had his reasons, I guess," Mark chimed in, his voice a touch too casual. "Reasons? What reasons could he possibly have for leaving everything to you? I was the one by his side all those months." My voice broke, and I could feel tears stinging my eyes. "I don't know, Carla." "It's his will." "We have to respect it," Robert finally spoke, laying a hand on my shoulder. That day, I walked out of the attorney's office feeling utterly betrayed, not just by Grandpa, but by Mark and, to some extent, Robert. It felt like the universe was laughing at me, pointing out my naivete in believing that family and love would always be my sanctuary. A few months passed. Life had to go on, even if it was a painful slog. One evening, while Robert was at work and I was cleaning the apartment, I stumbled upon an old, unopened envelope at the back of a bottom drawer. "What's this?" I mumbled, curious but not expecting much. As I read the handwritten lines, my hands began to tremble. It was Grandpa's true will, stating that his estate should be divided equally between Mark and me. Is this some kind of joke? I thought. Then it hit me. This was the reason for Mark's strange behavior and Robert's tension. They had known about this. They had hidden it from me. Feeling like a volcano about to erupt, I stormed into the living room just as Mark was stepping in for a visit. "Why didn't you burn it?" I heard him say to Robert, who had just come home. Caught off guard, both looked like deer in headlights. The room was thick with tension and betrayal. "Answer me!" I yelled, waving the paper in front of them. "You lied to me, both of you. You betrayed me." It was the moment of reckoning, the ugly truth that shattered the illusion of family and love I'd held onto for so long. My brother and my husband, the two men I'd trusted implicitly, had stabbed me in the back. "You will pay for this," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage and resolve I'd never felt before. And so, the battle lines were drawn. But unlike the dramas or tragedies, this was real life. And in real life, revenge isn't served cold. It's served with a burning fury that can either consume you or forge you into something stronger. I chose the latter. But that's a story for another chapter. The atmosphere was thick with betrayal, each of us locked in a moment that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Mark was the first to break the silence, his voice shaky but defiant. "You weren't supposed to find that, Carla. Obviously. Were you ever planning on telling me the truth?" I shot back, holding up the paper that revealed their deceit. "No," Robert finally spoke up. "We weren't. You know this means war, right?" My voice was icy, a legal one. "You do understand that, don't you?" Mark sighed. I guess I didn't think that far ahead. "You never do," I replied, anger giving way to a rising tide of disillusionment. "You always think you can get away with everything." "You have to admit, it almost worked," Robert chimed in, a half smile on his face. "I can't even look at you right now," I told Robert. "I can't believe you do this to me. We built a life together. Does that mean nothing to you?" "To be honest, Carla, it was just business," Robert said, almost too calmly. "Just business. This is my life we're talking about." I was shouting now, every ounce of self-control abandoned. "And you're ruining mine," Mark added, "by blowing this out of proportion." "Blowing this out of proportion?" I was incredulous. "You stole from me." Robert sighed. "Well, now that everything is out in the open, what are you planning to do?" "Justice," I declared, my voice steely. "I will get what's rightfully mine. And you, Mark, you'll face the consequences of your actions." Without waiting for their responses, I left the apartment, my heels clicking like a ticking bomb about to go off. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer. I didn't care about the legal fees. This was about more than money. This was about integrity, about standing up for oneself when the world seems to be conspiring against you. It took months of courtroom battles, evidence gathering, and emotional upheaval. Mark hired his own attorney, and Robert, for some reason, stayed out of it, probably hoping to avoid further entanglement in a losing battle. After several nerve-wracking court appearances, the verdict was finally in my favor. The judge invalidated the fake will and honored the real one, awarding me my rightful inheritance. Mark was sentenced to prison for fraud, unable to prove his innocence. As for Robert, well, there wasn't enough evidence to implicate him, but that didn't matter. Our marriage was beyond saving. "Carla, are you sure about this?" Robert asked as he signed the divorce papers, his voice tinged with a sadness I couldn't bring myself to care about. "I've never been surer about anything in my life," I responded, finalizing the end of our chapter together. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and loss. Yes, I'd won, but what had I lost in the process? Family, love, trust, those intangible things that you can't put a price on. But then, maybe this was a win. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up for myself, for what was right. And while the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: I was the author of my own destiny now. There's a saying that revenge is a dish best served cold. But my revenge wasn't cold. It was righteous, a fiery reclaiming of my own worth and dignity. If there's anything I've learned from this harrowing chapter of my life, it's this. Never underestimate the lengths to which people will go to deceive you, but also never underestimate your own strength to rise from the ashes and rebuild. And so, I stepped out into the world, a new chapter awaiting me. But this time, I was ready, because if life was a game, I just learned how to play it better, and I was not about to be anyone's pawn. Mark was in prison, facing the consequences of his greed and deceit. Robert, on the other hand, was a free man. Legally, he had slipped through the cracks, managing to evade the punishment he so rightly deserved. Yet, freedom has its own costs, and I knew he'd pay for his betrayal in ways that a court of law couldn't dictate. The divorce was final. I remember standing in the empty living room of our apartment after he'd moved out. The space was filled with echoes of what used to be. Laughter, love, plans for a future that would never happen now. My phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. "Can we meet? There are things I'd like to say." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We chose a public place, a park where we'd spent better times. Seeing him seated on a bench, looking somewhat defeated, I felt a strange concoction of vindication and heartache. "Carla, I won't justify what I did. I can't. I just want you to know that I'm sorry," he began, his voice shaky. "Do you even know what you're sorry for, Robert?" I asked, studying his face for some sign of sincerity. "I betrayed your trust, and I destroyed our marriage," he admitted, looking me straight in the eyes for the first time in months. "You did," I confirmed, "and it's too late for sorry." "I know," he sighed, "but I loved you, Carla. In my flawed, messed up way, I did love you. If that's your version of love, Robert, then I'm glad to be rid of it." "Where will you go now?" he asked, almost as if he were still a part of my plans. "That's no longer your concern," I responded, feeling the finality of the moment wash over me. I walked away then, not once looking back. I'd received my legal due, reclaimed my dignity, but some costs were too steep to calculate. The cost of trusting and loving people who'd betrayed me. How do you quantify that? You don't! You simply bear it as a painful scar on your soul, a lesson hard learned. I started rebuilding my life, brick by brick, on a foundation of newfound wisdom and caution. The inheritance, after all the legal battles, was both a reminder of the betrayal I'd faced and the resource I needed to start anew. I used part of it to go back to school, focusing on a career that would make me financially and emotionally independent. It was my way of ensuring that I would never again be in a position to be exploited by those I trusted. During this time, I also attended therapy, not just to heal, but to understand how I'd allowed myself to be deceived, to ensure it would never happen again. My therapist said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who know exactly how to hurt us. It's not your fault that you trusted. It's their fault that they broke it. As for family, well, that's a complicated word now. Blood may be thicker than water, but it can also be poisonous. I found my own tribe, people who didn't share my DNA, but who proved to be more family than those who did. It would be tidy to say that I forgave Mark and Robert, that we reconciled and lived happily ever after. But life isn't a fairy tale, and in my story, some bridges were burned beyond repair. And so, my tale of revenge isn't just a story of justice served. It's a story of self-discovery and survival. It's a story that cautions you to never underestimate the depths of human deception, but also never to underestimate your own resilience. I'd lost my family, my spouse, my naive faith in people. Yet, I'd found something far more valuable: myself. This is my story. A story of betrayal, of a fractured fairy tale, but most importantly, of survival. And while revenge may be a dish best served cold, I served mine blazing with the fire of someone who had lost much, but had found herself. And that, in the end, was worth everything.